From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Librarian of Congress, James H. Billington.
Thank you very much. Those fanfares were not for me, but for this occasion and for the benefactor and the awardees who we especially honor this year. But it is always fun to begin with someone whose collections we have and some of whose most important music we have commissioned here. Members of Congress, of the Diplomatic Corps, of the Library's James Madison Council, collegial scholars and librarians, including it was much in France there, the head of the Bibliothèque Nationale is with us tonight, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure as Librarian of Congress to welcome you all to this evening's ceremonial awarding of the John W. Kluge Prize for Lifetime Achievement in the Study of Humanity. We are surrounded on the next floor with these open exhibits that are now part of an educational outreach project that is reaching all across the country. And we hope that the new technology that is involved in getting the materials, primary materials of our history and culture out to a broader audience with appropriate fanfare in the background here. You will have a chance to see that. They will be open all night, and we would welcome your looking and seeing what has happened and what is, we think, one of the more exciting vistas for teaching history, memory, and culture, as well as stimulating the minds of young people living in very much on the internet all over the world. We're building a world digital library as well as a national one with new additions, and it's all based on sharing the original heritage of humanity, so much of which is preserved here. So I hope you'll have a chance to see it. But tonight, we are, as I say, awarding the John W. Kluge Prize for Lifetime Achievement in the Humanities. When I was sworn in here some years ago, I said we wanted to go in more deeply and out more broadly. I'd mentioned about going out more broadly to the very large numbers, approaching 100 million, who repeat users of our educational website. But here we're saluting the idea of going in more deeply. And for that, it is appropriate that we begin our proceedings by honoring the man who, more than any other, has enabled us to do that. He is, of course, John W. Kluge, the founding and long-serving chairman of the Madison Council, the library's first ever national private support group, which is meeting here, many of whose members are here, and has enabled us, in the immortal words of John himself, to get the champagne out of the bottle. Just as these exhibits will give us a little magic at the end of the collecting tunnel, a passageway that leads in from the new Capitol Visitor Center, and will make it possible much more easily for the broad public and the educational people involved in the important business of K-12 education to come in here more broadly. So Mr. Kluge cut the ribbon that celebrates this reconnecting of the Library of Congress, where the first century of it was in the Capitol building, and now it has been reconnected directly, so that this link between libraries and legislation, between learning and the law and the making of laws can be ever more strong. John was, as I've said, the founding, long-serving chairman of the Madison Council, and it's an enormous pleasure and privilege to welcome John Kluge and Maria Kluge here with us this evening. He enabled this unique international award to come into being as a kind of pinnacle recognition of the kind of scholarship that the country needs, the world needs. And it's for him that we sounded that opening fanfare tonight. And we will continue now with two brief videos of tribute to our donor, our founder, who has made such a difference. The first is a digested version of the much longer film about John Kluge that the library prepared for the bicentennial of the library in the year 2000. The second is a short new film about the prize as we celebrate this year the 5th anniversary of its founding. We are pleased and honored that they are both with us tonight. We hope that he and all of you will enjoy this brief cinematic presentation before we turn to the meeting and the presentation of the prize itself, and that you will also join me now in extending a special welcome to John and Maria Kluge, whom I hope will stand, if they would, and be recognized at the beginning of this tribute.
John Kluge is an American icon, an entrepreneur with a heart.
I would describe him as a strong, resourceful fountain, which, even if there is no water, can create again water.
I think this country does an awful lot of talking and doesn't follow through with the kind of actions that it really takes. I don't want to do talking about it. I want to really make life a better place. It has nothing to do with anything except the will to make a difference.
At the height of his career in 1990, John Kluge wanted to make a difference. This time to the oldest federal cultural institution in America, the Library of Congress. John Kluge has never forgotten he was one of the millions of immigrants who came to America with the desire to better themselves. He was 8 years old when he left Germany and crossed the Atlantic with his mother and German-American stepfather. John's only possession, a Dresden horse.
I treasured that horse, and I still have it. And every time I think I'm too smart for my own britches, I look at that horse. I know exactly where I came from.
After landing at Ellis Island, the family moved west and landed in Detroit, where John enrolled in the public school system.
I had to excel to get a scholarship. So I went through high school, I think, with all A's because I had to, not because I wanted to.
After high school, he applied for a scholarship to Columbia University in New York City. And he got that scholarship.
I wrote back and I told them if they wanted me, they'd have to double it. Believe it or not, they doubled my scholarship.
After hard studies, John graduated from Columbia, and in 1937, he landed his first real job, working for a printing company in Detroit. The president of the company had his doubts about this young man.
The president said, I can tell you one thing. I know for sure you're never going to amount to anything. And he was darn near right. I went from shipping clerk to vice president of sales in 18 months.
But then World War II broke out. John joined the Army as an enlisted man and ended up as a captain on General Marshall's staff in military intelligence. Soon after the war, John read a newspaper article that would dramatically shape the rest of his career.
I read in the Wall Street Journal you could start a radio station for $15,000. And we started WGAY in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Next, John revolutionized independent television. His company, Metro Media, was also a pioneer in cellular communications, and it grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire. In the late 80s, John surprised everyone by selling off his television stations, and soon after, his cellular communications interest. He was becoming a dedicated philanthropist. His generosity spread wide, from restoring the Statue of Liberty to supporting educational institutions to quietly helping people in need. This spirit turned next to the Library of Congress. John's passion for education had found a great home. He helped form the James Madison Council, the library's first national private sector advisory board, which has supported the work of the library since 1990. Under John's leadership, the Madison Council supported hundreds of library projects, from exhibiting the treasures of the Vatican Library to purchasing the love letters of Edna St. Vincent Millay. The library's website is now one of the nation's leading providers of free educational content. Of all John's gifts, the Kluge Center best embraces his will to make a difference. This center brings together the world's best scholars to the library to study and share their insights with the members of Congress and other public figures. John continues to look forward, always searching for new ways to make a difference in his own life and in the lives of others.
The philanthropy comes natural because I just know when you pass out of this picture, you don't take anything with you. The only thing I brought to this country was that horse, and I'm not going to take it out of this country either. In the sands of time, we make very little difference, but what difference we can make, we should try to make. infuse a mind to improve itself, that will pass on to their children and their children's children. Thank you. I can assure you that my talk will be shorter than it took time to get up to this podium. You know, the recipients are the important people, because they have dedicated their life to the scholarship of their particular field. I have wanted, with the encouragement of the librarian, who is so distinguished, he ought to be up here as a prize winner. The people that have gone through the selection process, this year there were 3,000, and I think they selected out of them 284, and out of them are the two you're going to see here tonight. Thank you for coming here. It's a great honor for me to be here. In fact, it's a great honor for me to be alive. Thank you.
The Kluge Prize is utterly unique among major international awards at the $1 million level. It covers by far the widest range of scholarly fields, virtually all the humanities and social sciences. It honors scholars who over a long period of time mine treasures, create knowledge, and distill wisdom out of the cumulative records of the human experience. Anyone, anywhere can make a nomination, and the many-layered selection process involves both distinguished outside scholars and the multilingual multi-talented staff of this library, the largest and most wide-ranging collection of stored human knowledge in history. The same Kluge endowment that has funded this prize has also created the center, as you saw in the film, which is bringing other advanced scholars to work within this inspiring building. Here, we all serve a special invention of the American imagination when they created this beautiful building. It's at the top of the internal cupola, the center of the main reading room. It represents a new goddess that the young republic created, the goddess of human understanding. And she is shown removing the veil of ignorance from the face of humanity in this central, wonderful mural. And all of these murals and so forth can now be seen, interpreted, and understood, not only in the exhibits you can see up there, but online. Anyhow, the Congress of the United States has been the greatest patron of the library in human history, and this institution, which Congress has created and supported for 208 years, plays a special role in sustaining our knowledge-based democracy. For almost the entire 19th century, the library was located in the Capitol, and just this week, the library has been physically reconnected with the Capitol through the new Visitor Center and its direct connecting passageway into this building. John Kluge, when he heard of this, with his capacity for encapsulating the meaning of a moment, said, this is going to be the magic at the end of the tunnel. We call it a passageway now, but it is, I think, a lot of magic, and there is a wonder in being able to see what the essence of something new is, and then to help make it happen. This should help us, I think, better realize our aspiration to enable our legislators to talk more frequently and informally. The room we were in for the reception is the members' room, and that's where they meet very, very often. But to talk frequently and informally with the kind of ranging and restless human minds that are especially needed in difficult times. Thomas Jefferson had such a mind in such a time. His library of 6,487 books in 16 languages became the core of the Library of Congress and is now on full display here in this building, which bears his name. Now, it was organized under 3 headings, which Jefferson felt encompassed all human knowledge: memory, reason, and imagination. These 3 broad categories for studying the human record were first suggested by Francis Bacon at the dawn of the modern age. And memory, reason, and imagination beautifully define the achievement in the study of humanity of both of tonight's Kluge Prize winners. People whom we honor tonight at the onset of a postmodern era, if you like, just as Bacon defined it at the beginning of the modern era. Now, both of them have used reason and imagination to reconfigure and enlarge humanity's memory of distant and little understood millennial epochs in the human experience. Between them, their work implicitly suggests that positive future developments could very unexpectedly reemerge from the forgotten formative forces and the many varied cultures in the vast area stretching from Peter Brown's Ireland to Romila Thapar's Indian subcontinent. Romila Thapar's lifelong study of nearly 2,000 years in the early history of the Indian subcontinent has used a very wide variety of ancient source materials and of modern social science perspectives to help the world better understand one of the world's most ancient and complex cultures. One expert reviewing her work noted that, and I'm quoting, Thapar's rigorous professional standards are cast against a background of her implicit appreciation of an India that accommodates civilizational diversity. Moving beyond studies written in the colonial period and more recently by xenophobic extremists, she has attracted criticism, she has aroused controversy, but she has been a dignified public defender of democratic pluralism in her society and has shown balanced judgments that are always open to reason revision in the writing of history. She has significantly changed the teaching of history and the writing of textbooks in her native country. As another Indologist has explained, quote again, her integrative approach, her persistent rejection of ideologically driven presuppositions continues to set the standard for a new generation of historians. And a third scholar reviewing this has said that Thapar's relentless striving for historical truth, independent of the superimposition of vacillating theories and of current socio-political conditions, is a landmark in the global writing of history. Peter Brown, like Romila Thapar, covers a very broad canvas of languages and cultures, and of the many different academic disciplines involved in the study of humanity. Each of them zeroed in early on writing an important biography of a towering individual human being that played a central role in the overall stories they were telling. Thapar on the Buddhist Emperor Asoka of ancient India and Afghanistan, Brown on the most prolific and profound Christian writer of the late Roman and early medieval period, St. Augustine. Brown's field of vision has since widened out even more to reach from Iceland to Central Asia. He has persuasively challenged the long-held view that the history of the first millennium AD is basically a sad tale of the slow fall of Rome and of Europe's descent into darkness. He sees it instead as an age of late antiquity from 200 to 1000 AD in which classical culture persisted and interpenetrated Christianity as it spread throughout and beyond the Mediterranean world. He traces the many diverse Christian actors and forms of interaction with their Muslim rival who rose in the East, and with the dispersed Jewish communities that kept alive throughout the period, the oldest of the three Abrahamic monotheisms. His writings draw from a wide array of disciplines, including archaeology, anthropology, and psychology, from reading texts in a wide variety of languages and from visiting the places that they were written, which he describes as, and I think this is typical of his wonderful quotes, the great untidy excavation sites of the texts themselves. They emerge not only from people, but from what a site looked like, and he can summon that up as few people can. His works have influenced political theorists, philosophers, scholars of religion and the arts in many parts of the world. With an elegant and accessible literary style, he has brought back to life for a very broad modern readership, not only the spiritual perspectives of very unfamiliar holy men throughout this large universe that he describes, but also how they and others related to their physical bodies, to the gaining of wealth, to the social structures in which they lived. Brown has covered all of Jefferson's categories, combining ranging imagination with temperate reason to reconstruct for us all the readable memory of a little understood epoch of the human experience. Peter Brown has helped us better understand the multiple roots of a Western European civilization that still rules more than 1 billion varied peoples. Romila Thapar has helped us better understand the multiple roots of a South Asian civilization that also rules more than 1 billion varied peoples. Implicit in the rich narratives that they each have given us is the Jeffersonian belief that the pursuit of truth is the highest form of the pursuit of happiness and perhaps the best way to keep us from the pursuit of each other. It's my great pleasure to confer the Kluge Prize for lifelong achievement in the study of humanity on these two remarkable historians. It seems appropriate here in this scholarly center at the political heart of the world's first continent-wide democracy to begin by honoring a tireless seeker after truth from within the political heart of the world's largest continent-wide democracy on earth today. We in America are discovering, particularly in the sad times of their experience recently, but in general, ever more common interests with India in these troubled times. So ladies and gentlemen, let me begin on behalf of the oldest federal cultural institution of America to ask you to extend a warm Washington welcome to the distinguished Emeritus Professor of History from the Jawaharlal Nehru University of New Delhi, Dr. Romila Thapar.
Mr. Kluge, Dr. Billington, distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to express my deep appreciation for this unexpected and extraordinary honor. That I was deserving of such recognition emerging from a rigorous procedure of evaluation has been for me a cause of elation. I would like to accept the honor not just in my name, but also on behalf of those historians in India who have changed our understanding of the Indian past and are respected the world over for their contribution to advancing the discipline. Above all, my thanks go to Mr. Kluge, who established the prize and who's happily with us this evening. And let me add that it is a special delight to have been a scholar at the Kluge Center in the Library of Congress some years ago. And of course, my extreme pleasure in sharing this prize with an old friend, Professor Peter Brown. I belong to a generation of Indians that was born on the cusp of Indian independence. In 1947, we changed from being a colony to becoming a nation state. New nationhood meant a new collective identity for the Indian citizen. It meant discarding the divisive identities of Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, and whatever else as defined by colonial policy, and replacing these for a new identity that would be essentially Indian. History provides us insights into how our collective identities came to be formulated and why these formulations changed. Such identities were an essential part of the colonial construction of the Indian past. They were central to the notion of civilization as it was applied to Asia in the 19th century. The concept of civilization was instrumental in creating these identities that many still claim, but whose veracity can be challenged by history. Colonial scholarship carved up the world into civilizations. You can choose 26 or 8 as you please. And these were then ranked in hierarchical order. Each civilization was a demarcated territory with a distinctive language and a formal religion. In the Indian case, it was the Indian subcontinent, the Sanskrit language, and Hinduism. Texts relating to these features were given priority. Those beyond the borders of the so-called civilized were described as primitive, and echoes of this view have not entirely been silenced. Historically, such a view was of little help. Boundaries, lines on maps, often arbitrarily separating one people from another, were virtually non-existent prior to the making of the map. Flexible frontier zones, such as rivers, forests, deserts, mountains, formed the more likely contours of cultures and diplomacy. People and their beliefs and custom migrated, mingled, and created the interplay of cultures. The flexible frontier zones, on occasion, saw the emergence of the more creative ideas and objects. There were periods when one language was hegemonic, but in the company of others, and often gave way to another language. The choice of language was determined by its function. Sanskrit was initially the language of ritual and then of epic poetry. It took some centuries before it superseded the more commonly used Prakrit as the language of public discourse. And the popular devotional religions of India more frequently chose the local regional language. The articulation of religious belief and ritual has had the same variability, not only within Hinduism, but within every formal religion. Religions are not uniform, unchangeable monoliths. They are fragmented, and each fragment is configured by local faith, believed traditions and thoughts, or even practices from other religions. Knowledge systems that have governed world history have no single source. Thus, the direction taken by mathematics, astronomy, and medicine evolved from an intersection of ideas that were Chinese, Indian, Greek, and Arab, and these were then developed further in Europe. This interplay of cultures found little place in the earlier narrow definition of civilization. Yet, Indian civilization, for instance, remains partial if it does not reflect, in addition to Sanskrit texts, those of early Tamil, of Buddhist and Jain perspectives, of Persian literary and Islamic thought, of popular beliefs and practices, and of its secular literature in many languages. The uniqueness of Indian civilization lay in this plurality, which was viewed as normal by Indians. Civilizations can no longer be seen as self-sufficient and singular because, in fact, they are porous and permeable, mutating in space and time. They are reflective not only of their many constituent communities, but also others who have contributed to their making. A civilization is not static, it is a process. It has to be stretched vertically in horizontal time, for, as the Buddha said, time, like a mountain stream, has an unbroken continuity. It also has to be stretched horizontally across space to give visibility to the societies that participated in its making, with historical coming and going. Let me try and illustrate this with an example. When I recently visited Uzbekistan in Central Asia, I saw many Buddhist monasteries and the sculpture associated with Buddhist worship. These dated from the early Christian era and had come from Indian originals, with monks and traders who had settled in the oasis towns. And I also saw in the same vicinity the mosques and tombs built by Muslim royal families dating from a millennium later, and some of these were the prototypes of later Islamic architecture in India. These architectural monuments marked the comings and goings of events that make civilizations and history. And as I dipped my fingers into the Oxus River in Uzbekistan, I thought of how often in the ancient world this river, although far from India, had been a protagonist in the making of Indian civilization. Where then are the boundaries of civilizations? And can there be a legitimacy in claiming exclusive identities? And what are these boundaries and the nation states of our times? The lands from the Oxus to the Indus were the crucible from which emerged many shared cultures. Today's nations of Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, have all inherited this shared culture and history. India and Pakistan have an even larger common inheritance. Their historical identities, as largely Hindu or Muslim, were fashioned by colonial readings of the texts. These, for their own political purposes, erroneously insisted that there was an innate antagonism between the two communities. Yet, the same texts, if carefully read, reread, in nuanced ways, with the multiple approaches that historians can now use, could reflect a reversed reading. If the past is seen as a singular history, one land, one people, one language, it excludes much that is essential. Religious nationalists, if I may use that term, in India, and similar persons in other parts of the world have been virulent critics of historians who question singularities and who demonstrate the presence of multiple cultures in the evolution of any civilization, or who analyze relations between dominant groups and the oppressed, a common theme to all histories. And how might a historian then see the present? In some parts of the world, globalization seems to be conducive to encouraging the narrower, single, collective identities of colonial times. And this is a curious paradox for a post-colonial period. Economic frontiers have changed with the uncertainties that this has brought, but conformity to earlier identities and a variety of inequalities have not changed. These require to be explained not just through the prism of the contemporary moment, but also by investigating the deep structures of earlier histories. In redefining civilization and reconsidering identities, whether of the past or the present, a turn to the human sciences is imperative. Both civilizations and identities can only be explained by reaching out beyond our territorial boundaries and those of our imagination. And if we can bring serious historical inquiry to center stage. The uniqueness of India, it seems to me, has been its plurality, the plurality of its peoples and cultures that it has managed to knit together over time. And the cultivation of this plurality is also our common heritage. Thank you.
I have already said words about Peter Brown, but I would just simply add that, like Romila Thapar, he spans an enormous range of cultures, languages, and that break down normal divisions. Because while I mentioned his role in the formation and the reformation of European history, it also affects the Middle East, which he treats as an integrated part in many respects, with many new perspectives. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to present also the Kluge Prize to Professor Peter Brown.
Mr. and Mrs. Kluge, Jim Billington, Dr. Billington, ladies and gentlemen. In the past week, like my friend and long-time heroine, Romila Thapar, I have been stunned by this spectacular honor. And to find myself placed by this Kluge Award in the company of so many of my own heroes who have been presences in my own work for decades is in itself honor enough. I think first and foremost of those who've nurtured me in my own study of the Christian Church. Paul Ricoeur, who has helped me unlock the opaque mystery of Augustine's doctrine of original sin. Yaroslav Jerry Pelikan, who taught me the shape of Christian doctrine. Leszek Kolakowski, who introduced me to the burning issue of religious tolerance in Reformation times as in our own. John Hope Franklin, Yu Yingshi also have been strong winds in my sails, even if they've blown in from very different seas. But the real honor is to be thought worthy to participate in the high venture set before us by the vision of our donor, John Kluge. Now I have known Mr. Kluge for only an hour. I feel I know him well. Eigentlich ein Mensch. Really. But what was very obvious is the extent to which he's realized long before the humanities became in modern times a bundle of university subjects. They were not a subject, but a mighty virtue. Humanitas, in the singular, was a central value of the ancient Romans. Humanitas meant a sense of measure based on awareness of a common human condition. Humanitas assumed that the primary duty of humans was to deal with other human beings, not with abstractions, but with persons of flesh and blood, of like passions as ourselves. Above all, humanitas was a virtue that needed to be fought for. The Roman Empire was a cruel place. By modern standards, its human rights records were zilch. It included large slave populations, and even for the free, government was conducted by what was, by modern American standards, a truly chilling absence of constitutional restraints. To uphold a code of respect for human beings and love for those things which help to make them more human was never easy. It involved a moral militancy which we should not underestimate. Humanitas involved integrity, candor, good counsel in relation to those who wielded power, personal restraint in situations fraught with occasions for arrogance, sensuality, and cruelty. Above all, for good Romans, it involved a strenuous attachment to wisdom and a humane good humor in the face of ignorance, false certainty, and rage. Humanitas was the unwritten moral constitution of their empire, and in hard times they had no other. For John Kluge has seen this, and the greatest honor of all is to join John Kluge, the Library of Congress, presided over with such enterprise and fierce commitment to humanitas, in both its ancient Roman and in its modern senses, by Jim Billington, in helping to uphold this essential virtue in a modern world. Now, permit me an autobiographical moment. It was exactly 60 years ago in 1948 that I unwittingly entered the ancient world. I had come from my native Dublin to an English public school, Shrewsbury School in Shropshire, on the edge of the Welsh Marches. I was the son of an engineer. I was an eager amateur astronomer. I read with passion the futuristic novels of H.G. Wells. I had invented gunpowder, to my own great satisfaction and to the detriment of my aunt's drawing room carpet. I was all set to enter the brave new world of a scientific education. And all this seemed an eminently laudable venture for a boy from a Scots-Irish family in Dublin. In England, however, my housemaster thought otherwise. He was a Central Castings English public school master, complete with tweed jacket and a pipe which he puffed to give emphasis to his words. "Brown," he said, "you have done far too well in your entrance examination to do science. You shall do Greek." And the rest is ancient history. But it's not quite the ancient history which my housemaster had in mind. In the late 1940s, Greek was thought, above all, to give access only to the astonishing world of Athens of the 5th century BC. Like an incandescent supernova, reflected at the bottom of a deep well, classical Greece was held to lie at the root of the civilization of Europe. No one told me at that time that only a century after the golden age of Athens, Greek culture had spread from the Balkans to northern India as a result of the eastern conquest of Alexander the Great. By 300 BC, the supernova of a culture created by a mighty midget had fanned out to form a diffuse Milky Way made up of loosely connected, pulsing clusters of Greek-speaking settlements, each endowed with its own centers of Greek culture. The emergence of Greek as one of the first truly international, we would call globalized cultures of Eurasia was just as important for the future as was the miracle of Athens. I was reminded of this fact when, over 30 years ago in 1976, I entered the Kabul Museum in Afghanistan. Passing bearded Afghan guards in splendid tribal dress, I came up short as I saw in the entrance hall a block of white limestone, some 11 inches high, 18 inches wide, covered in lines of pure classical Greek. When a child, behave with order. When an adolescent, learn self-control. When in middle years, be upright in your dealings. When old, be full of wise counsel. When close to death, face it without grief. A Greek philosopher had brought these phrases 2,500 miles across the Middle East, from Delphi to Ai-Khanum, the modern name of a Greek settlement beside the Oxus, the modern Amu Darya, that lies only 150 miles from where the frontiers of China and Tajikistan meet the northeastern borders of modern Afghanistan. Looking at it, I realized that there were many more variants of the Greek tradition established in distant regions than represented by classical Athens alone. Cities such as Ai-Khanum were the nodes of a potentially global culture. It was not that the Greeks dominated the cultures of the vast lands in which they found themselves. Ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Babylonian, Iranian, Indian, continued beside them, largely unchanged, but in Greek merchants, in Greek soldiers, and in Greek authors, they now had the equivalent of a worldwide internet service. Greek joined regions and cultures which had previously interacted only with the slowness of what we now call snail mail. And this continued. Western Eurasia and the Mediterranean slowly became diffused with Judaism. Eventually, these regions converted to Christianity. The first stages of this momentous transformation occurred always through the medium of a globalized Greek. It was in a Greek translation associated with Alexander's new city of Alexandria that the Hebrew Torah became known to the pagan world and beloved of Jews throughout the Mediterranean. It was through sayings and stories first written down in international Greek that the words and actions of Jesus of Nazareth, a man without Greek who spoke only Aramaic, became known to the inhabitants of the Roman Empire. We are admirers of Athens, and rightly so. But for good or ill, those of us who claim to belong in any way to what we call the Judeo-Christian tradition are the direct products not of Athens, but of the globalized Middle East of the centuries after Alexander. The process of globalization, started in the centuries after Alexander, gathered momentum in the period which we now call the Age of Late Antiquity. After 300 AD, the rise of Christianity enabled the local languages of Africa and the Middle East to come back into their own. Translations of the scriptures gave new dignity to ancient tongues. In Egypt, Coptic gave a new lease of life to the language of the ancient pharaohs. All over Syria and Mesopotamia, Syriac, originally a variant of the widespread Aramaic dialect which Jesus of Nazareth himself had spoken, flowered with spectacular force as a language of religious thought and great religious poetry. Like Greek, Syriac was a language meant to travel. Stage by stage, Syriac moved eastward along the Silk Route. By the year 600 AD, Syriac-speaking Christians had reached western China. In the Caucasus, Armenians and Georgians each created their own vividly distinctive variants of a Christian culture. In Africa itself, far to the south of the Nile, Ethiopic emerged as the language of a Christian state of Ethiopia, which has survived up to this day. Altogether, in modern conditions of scholarship, the conventional tools of a classical scholar, Latin and Greek, though they remain indispensable, are no longer enough. There are other languages which we should learn. Alas, my old housemaster would have had to puff his pipe with ever greater emphasis than he did in 1948. He would now have to say, Brown, do Greek, but do not forget also to do Coptic, Syriac, Classical Armenian, Georgian, and Ethiopic. But why is this important? In the first place, we've learned that the world from which we come is considerably more diverse than we had thought. That vision down a well to one clear classical moment isn't enough. There were always many forms of classical Greek culture, scattered as far apart as Sicily and northeastern Afghanistan. In the same way, there have always been many forms of Christianity, just as there have been many forms of Judaism and many forms of Islam. Ultimately, it is a mistake to think that roots always grow vertically, straight down, as it were. They do not do so. They branch out horizontally, spreading always to seek further nourishment from other regions and from other traditions. In the process, they become inextricably tangled with the roots of other cultures. The strength of the tree resides not only in its taproots, but in that thrusting web of sideways stretching roots. And the way to these roots lies through learning languages. For to learn a language is not just to master a skill, it is an act of respect to the particularity of other cultures. It involves setting aside one's own world, if only for a moment, to listen with care to the thoughts from somebody else's world. Only with care, nurtured by discipline and by continued support for the teaching of as wide a spectrum as possible of tongues, ancient and modern, can we listen in, as it were, with respect to the subterranean and complex root system of our own world. Nothing illustrates this more clearly than the end of our story. For with the preaching of Islam and with the Arab conquests of the 7th century AD, now Arabic speakers rapidly joined the cultural dialogue of this already globalized Middle East. After centuries in which Greek had flowed easily into Syriac, Syriac back into Greek, Muslim writers, using their own rich Arabic tongue, found themselves surrounded by an exuberant and diverse religious and intellectual landscape, fostered not only in Greek, but in Syriac, Coptic, and Armenian, in the churches and monasteries of the Christian Middle East. The Muslims did not turn their backs on this landscape. Rather, they turned to leading representatives of the Christian and Jewish communities as human artisanal wells from which to tap subterranean reservoirs of thought and practice that reach back to the first decisive globalization of Greek culture in the days of Alexander the Great. Having passed from Greek mainly into Syriac, a very ancient wisdom flourished again, but now in the Arabic tongue. The result was a moment of remarkable openness. In the words of a Syrian Christian writing in Arabic in around the year 870 AD, it was quite possible for Muslims and Christians to meet as fellow scholars, to bargain with each other, as brothers who share in the goods they have inherited from God, their single Father. It's a moment we should remember. Anyone in these days who contemplates the Middle East and its adjoining regions cannot but be struck by the dire polarizations that have drained the life and color out of a world whose cultural and religious diversity, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, had once stood out so very clearly. Nowadays, all sides seem committed to seeing themselves in terms of black and white. All seek only vertical routes, roots that plunge into imagined pasts, smoothed and sealed against complexity like the sides of a narrow well. The interlocking roots of real life in a real Middle East, with its shared profane culture, with its vivid present-day Christian communities, with its ancient Jewish presences, and with its many possible Islams, have been pushed to one side. Yet these interlocking roots are there if we look for them. We can only spot them if we're prepared to turn away from the raw glare of brutally simplified images of the past, which nourish hatred and intransigence in the present. A more truthful past is our only way to a more nuanced present. It is up to us to ensure that this richer vision will not remain for us only a poignant glimpse of the world that we have lost. If we study hard, this may not happen. If we come to value the particularities of culture, of lifestyle, of worldview that are best revealed through the pursuit of difficult languages, bluntly, if we're prepared to take the effort to do our Syriac, our Armenian, our Georgian, our Coptic and Ethiopic, and then perhaps move on to Arabic itself, as my old housemaster once urged me to do my Greek, then we might see a Middle Eastern region gain the vivid and variegated colors which have become gray in recent times. It would be a world which you would then be proud to call the world that we have regained. Thank you.
I want to thank both of our awardees who have given us the highest compliment of their deepest thoughts, and wish them well in the future, and wish that we will all now ascend. You have lifted up our spirits. We will now lift up your appetites and invite you for dinner on the upper level. Thank you. Thank you once again.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.